I've had some requests to detail the effects that I'm using in Ableton when I'm performing live. So I'm going to go through each effects chain, show you what plugins I'm using, show you what they sound like on their own, and then show you how they work together. The way that my Ableton session is set up is that my guitar comes in on a channel where you don't hear any of the dry signal of the guitar, but it goes to 4 separate effects sends that I control from my little Novation guy here with the knobs on it. I forget what it's called because I put tape on it. Also, there is a track that has a looper on it that's also being fed by the guitar. You're usually not hearing the dry signal from the looper, but it's going to the same 4 effects chains that the guitar track is. And the reason I do this is that it allows me to continuously vary how much of the guitar and how much of the looper is going to each effect. I can kind of send them in different directions, get different textures going. I can shift between 2 different textures for a sort of a morphing psychedelic thing. It makes the process of improvising with the computer a little more performative and freaky and morphic. So I'll run through what's going on in each channel, and I'll give a sound example without the dry guitar sound. So this is just the effects. My first effects send goes to the Valhalla DSP Shimmer, which is kind of like a Brian Eno in a box. It's a reverb that also has pitch on the feedback, kind of like an Eventide sort of effect, and it sounds like this. So with this plugin, I will vary the amount of feedback, which determines whether or not there's any pitch shifting. If I turn the feedback all the way down, it's just kind of a big, beautiful, diffused, modulating reverb. But if I turn the feedback up a lot, I just turn it up a bunch, you get this. And that'll go on basically forever. It's a really beautiful sound. It's a sound that I'll use sometimes if I'm just playing guitar and I want to throw a little extra ambience, kind of increase the space that I'm playing in. I'll use that. Also, because of how beautiful this reverb sounds, I can take something that might be kind of pointy and disjointed and feed it into that, and it sort of smooths it out into a choir of angels kind of sound. You'll notice that I'm using a lot of Soundtoys plugins because I really like them and I use them in production and mixing as well. On my second effects chain, I'm using the Soundtoys Crystallizer and Echo Boy. This channel can act as just my standard delay sound, which sounds something like this. Sort of impersonating a really widely spaced stereo space echo kind of sound. And then sometimes I'll add in this crystallizer in front of that, which sounds like this. which in my synesthesia sort of makes me think of fireflies or embers from a fire kind of flying up into the sky. On my third effects end, I like to have an effect that's doing what's called square wave modulation. So most delays have the option of modulating the delay, so it pitch shifts it a little bit and can kind of create some depth and interest. Usually they're doing that with a sine wave, but you can do it with a square wave on certain delays, which means that rather than the delay time going up and down in a smooth way, it jumps up and down. What this does is it creates lots of pitches that kind of jump up and down and surprise me. It's kind of like there's an extra unreliable band member jamming along with me, which is fun when you're playing by yourself. Right now I'm using the Soundtoys Primal Tap, but I've also used emulations of the PCM42 to do this. Here's what this channel sounds like by itself. On my fourth effects channel, I have Soundtoys Filter Freak, Devil Lock, and Echo Boy. This is one of the more convoluted chains, and I kind of change plugins around on this one a bunch. What the filter's doing here is kind of acting as a gatekeeper, only letting certain information through. So if it's on the low side of the filter sweep, it'll let more low end through. If it's on the high side of the filter sweep, it'll let more high end through. And I like doing this, especially when I have loops going, because I might have a loop that has a bunch of low notes, a bunch of high notes mixed together. And this sort of independent of the rhythm of the loop or anything like that will feed different amounts of it through the following effects, which kind of creates another rhythm and another long sweep in the performance. It's kind of a way of automating things so that if I'm playing over a loop, it doesn't just sound like the same static thing happening again and again. Also, the filter, depending on where it is in the EQ sweep, activates different textures in the distortion that follows it, which I think is really cool. This channel sounds something like this. It's pretty gnarly by itself, but mixed in with the other textures, it allows me to bring in kind of a more intense, heavy kind of sound in my performances. So I've captured a loop in Ableton, and I'm going to send that to the different effects chains so you can hear how I can shift what's going on texturally and intensity-wise. The thing I really like about this setup is how it lets me morph between beautiful things and ugly things. When I'm in the middle of a long improvisation, it gives me an out. Sometimes I paint myself into a corner with what I'm playing or what I've looped, and this lets me completely retextualize it by sending it to a different effects chain in a very psychedelic, seamless way. It also takes stuff that I've played or looped and presents it in a new context, which is really exciting for me, especially when I'm playing by myself. So this has been a really fruitful setup for me. You can do something similar. Anybody can get Ableton Live and set up their own effects chains, and I would just suggest that you experiment with what you like having on each channel. I've got 4 effects channels going, because I've got 4 fingers and it's easy to just reach down and mess with the knobs. It's kind of intuitive for me, but you can have as many as you want. I would suggest experimenting with the plugins that you have, seeing what works for you and what kind of sounds you like to be able to shift between. These are the effects that I'm using in my setup right now, but I'm continually experimenting with what's on each channel, and I would encourage the same for you. If you have any thoughts or questions, or maybe some plugins that you think are awesome, please feel free to share that with me.
Nailed it.